Hey Vision Chasers, it's Dr. Bird here with another social studies lesson for you today. Today I'm actually going to answer an email question from David in Augusta, Georgia. And David's question is, what were the Jim Crow laws? So, David, here we go. Once Reconstruction ended, the people who were in charge of the South before the Civil War slowly started to regain power. And these people were not happy that their slaves were now freedmen. And so they began to pass a number of laws known as the Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow was the name of a popular minstrel show. And a minstrel show was a performance that made fun of black people. And on your screen right now, you're seeing an example of a minstrel show from the 1940s. The Jim Crow laws were designed to isolate African Americans and place them in an inferior position compared to white people. This was the beginning of segregation in the post-Civil War South. In many Southern churches, people were taught that whites were the chosen people and that blacks were cursed. Here's some examples of Jim Crow laws. A black male and a white male could not shake hands because it implied that both were socially equal. Blacks and whites were not supposed to eat together. Now, if they did eat together, whites were to be served first, and some sort of partition was to be placed between them. And under no circumstances was a black male to offer to light a cigarette of a white female. Whites did not use courtesy titles of respect when referring to blacks. For example, Mr., Mrs., Miss, Sir, or Ma'am. Now, instead, black people were called by their first name or some sort of derogatory term. White motorists had the right of way at all intersections. And lastly, if a black person rode in a car driven by a white person, the black person had to sit in the back seat or the back of a truck. Although it is perfectly clear that this is a violation of civil rights, the Supreme Court ruled the Jim Crow laws were constitutional in the Plessy versus Ferguson decision of 1896. Now, it wouldn't be until the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s that the Jim Crow laws would be recognized as illegal.
Listen, all you gals and boys, I'm just from Tuckahoe. I'm going to sing a little song. My name's Jim Crow. Wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. I went down to the river.
In 1836, Jim Crow is born. He begins his strange career as a malicious minstrel caricature of a black man, created by a white man to amuse white audiences. Jim Crow would come to symbolize one of the most tragic eras of race relations in American history, a time deeply rooted in promise and contradiction. 1865, 4 million Americans, slaves simply because they were born black, were now free. But in little over a decade, that promise was gone, replaced by a rigid system of laws designed to keep blacks from experiencing any of their newly achieved rights. It would be known as the era of Jim Crow, the American form of racial apartheid.
I tried to lean inside and get me a cup of water. And those white people beat me till I was unconscious. They thought I was dead.
My dad said, as long as you're living in this South, you're going to have to go to the back door in this town. And you just settle for that. He said, but one thing I want you to swear and promise to me, that you will never get used to it.
I'm not ashamed of the segregated and Jim Crow experience. all because we were able to devise techniques for survival that permitted us to abide our time and to wait until our change come.
As most blacks were willing to bide their time, some began to fight back. In the late 1880s and 90s, they embarked on an uncertain campaign to secure voting rights, build their own communities, schools, businesses, and churches, and to demand redress against mob violence and lynching. The white supremacists fought back. By 1919, the Ku Klux Klan, which had been a Southern idiosyncrasy, became a national ideology. White supremacy, the power behind Jim Crow, appeared invincible. And over the next decade, the violence against blacks would grow even more horrific. But black Americans continued to battle, using the power of the press and ultimately the power of the courts to pursue their quest for freedom and equality against racism. The rise and fall of Jim Crow is their story, the story of strong men and women who would never accept the demeaning, threatening, and perilous world of Jim Crow. The rise and fall of Jim Crow is the story of those who, in the face of unending terror, achieved triumphs. Triumphs that would in time make America a better place, not just for themselves, but for all of us.